On This Week in Enterprise Tech, we talk about how Russia's warning us of possible cyberwar following reports of U.S. attacking their power grid. Not good. Now, Curtis also talks about a Florida town actually hit by ransomware. Plus, Curtis, Brian, and I talk with Bill Malik, VP of Infrastructure Strategies at Trend Micro, about the potential collapse of GPS. It's Wyatt on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust. This is Twit.
This is Twyat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 347, recorded June 21st, 2019, the collapse of GPS. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by LastPass, the #1 most preferred password manager. Just remember your master password, and LastPass remembers the rest. Visit lastpass.com/twit to learn more. And by Atlassian. Atlassian software powers the full spectrum of collaboration between IT teams and the rest of your organization. Visit Atlassian.com/teams/IT to see what IT can be by giving their products a try for free. And by Worldwide Technology. Worldwide Technology's Advanced Technology Center is like no other testing and research lab, with more than $500 million of equipment, including OEMs like Dell EMC. And it's virtual, so you can access it 24/7. To learn more and get insights into all that it offers, go to wwt.com/twit. Welcome to Twyat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that's dedicated to you, the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and that geek who just wants to know how this world is connected. I'm your host, Louis Maresca, your guide through this big, giant world of the enterprise. But I definitely can't guide you by myself. Let's bring in some of the top enterprise tech professionals in the industry, starting with our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin, senior editor at Dark Reading. Curtis, what's keeping you busy?
Well, between trying not to drown here in Florida as the rainy season gets off to a good, hard start, and getting ready for life in the desert as we prepare to head out to Black Cat, USA in August, I'm staying fairly busy. Have very little time for some of my other projects, like the very large laser cutter I'm working with at one of the local maker spaces. So plenty to keep me off the streets at night.
Fantastic. Well, speaking of person who has lots of projects in the hopper, let's add to the ranks of the enterprise tech professionals is Mr. Brian McHenry, Director of Global Security Solutions at F5 Networks. Great to have you back, Brian. What's keeping you busy?
Hey, good to be back, Lou. NGINX, the ongoing integration is all taking up all my time at F5 these days. And when I'm not, my partner in crime in our little maker space in the basement, he's actually just had a tonsillectomy. So not quite as much free time spent on tech hobbies, maybe as much as the giant laser that Mr. Franklin's been using.
We always love to play with giant lasers, so we will live vicariously through Mr. Curt Franklin. But folks, we do have a pretty great show today. We not only going to talk a little bit about Russia and the cyberwar threat that's following a report that U.S. attacked their power grid, but also we have a really great guest, Bill Malik, VP of Infrastructure Strategies at Trend Micro, to talk about the potential collapse of GPS. But before we get into all that goodness, let's go ahead and jump into this week's blips. Well, web browsers are now weaved into the very fabric of our daily lives, right? Well, when they show vulnerability, they put a large population, a portion of the population, including organizations, at a big risk. Now, most JavaScript runtimes today are actually embedded as part of the web browser host and their sandbox. They're kind of broken away, and they make sure that the code that's actually executing inside of them can't really break out and cause havoc on the browser host process or on the operating system that it's running on. Well, Firefox and its maintainer, Mozilla, got a taste of what vulnerabilities can do in a browser. Now, back in April, a bug that was reported to Mozilla from a researcher at Google's Project Zero found that actually found a code execution flaw in Firefox. Now, it took about over a month for Firefox to actually respond to the bug. Is this bad, you may ask? Well, let's talk about exploit. In the recent weeks, Chief Information Security Officer for the Digital Currency Exchange reported that hackers actually used this flaw to attack against employees of Coinbase. However, that looked like the end of it until this past week. Mac OS security expert Patrick Wardle did an analysis of Mac malware and its origins and found that Firefox's vulnerability was the root of malware that was able to infect a fully patched latest Mac OS machine. Now, among other things, Wardle noticed that early on was that the virus total service showed that malware was detected by only one of what at the time was 53 available malware detectors. Now, that was strange because XProtect on Mac OS, the bare bones malware detector built into Mac OS, had been detecting a similar malware back in since 2016. Now, it's surprising malware detectors really hadn't obtained a detection signature from Apple for this particular strain. Now, Wardle also noticed that the malware sample wasn't digitally signed by its developer. Now, since Firefox is actually a privileged process, it was able to install a malware without detection from these other services or these detectors. Now, this seems to be a continuing lesson companies are getting when it comes to exploits. Deliver patches fast and swiftly and find ways to get organizations to install them immediately. Sound familiar?
So Ajit Pai, FCC commissioner, says NOAA and NASA are wrong about 5G harming forecasts. The FCC commissioner Pai, most known for his opposition to net neutrality, says NOAA and NASA have bad data when it comes to 5G wireless bands and weather forecasts. Passive weather sensors are in a similar wireless band as the 24 gigahertz band recently up for auction by the FCC to wireless providers. Pai claims that the 5G bands ranging from 24.25 gigahertz up to 25.25 gigahertz are separated by over 250 megahertz from the weather sensors bands in question. Water vapor emits radiation at 23.8 gigahertz. NASA and NOAA scientists are worried that sensors won't be able to pick up these faint signals because of interference from 5G transmissions in the adjacent 24 gigahertz band, a concern echoed by a memo from the U.S. Navy. Pai stressed that the 5G spectrum is separated from the passive weather sensors in question by over 250 megahertz. The FCC's proposed emission limits for the spectrum are appropriate for protection of passive weather sensors, he said. Pai also claimed that over 40,000 fixed and microwave links operating just below that 23.8 gigahertz band have been in operation without a single report of interference. The NOAA study supporting theirs and NASA's claims that these 5G bands would cause interference is not yet publicly available, with no timetable set for its release. Meanwhile, Pai says no other validated studies have been made available since 2017, when concerns were first aired about possible weather sensor interference. As you might expect, Congress is divided along party lines, with Republicans largely supporting Pai and Democrats expressing dismay that proper due diligence has not been done in auctioning these bands off to wireless providers. 24 gigahertz is not the only 5G band, however, and the limit for 5G bands will be negotiated at the World Radio Communications Conference to be held in Egypt in October of this year. It's hard to find reason to trust Pai, who has used more than one specious argument to justify the dismantling of net neutrality laws and has used bad data himself to support claims his policies have increased consumer broadband access and adoption. More on Mr. Pai in my next blip. Stay tuned.
Well, the GDPR has a right of access, but that right comes complete with some real problems. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, has a provision called right of access, which states that individuals have a right to access their own personal data. But what happens when companies holding this data don't properly verify identities before handing it over? James Paver, a doctoral student at Oxford University, sought to determine how organizations handle requests for highly sensitive information under this right of access. To do this, he used GDPR subject access requests to obtain as much data as possible about his fiancée, well, with her permission, of course, from more than 150 companies. He went into the experiment already holding three types of data: his fiancée's full name, an old phone number of hers that he found online, and a generic email address, firstname.lastname@gmail.com. He found that more than 20 out of the 150 companies revealed some sort of sensitive information when asked. Paver was able to get biographical information, passport number, a history of hotels she had stayed at. He was also able to verify whether she had accounts with certain businesses. Interestingly, some companies started out strong with requests for identity verification, then caved when Paver said that he just didn't feel comfortable giving them that information. Now, Paver will be presenting the complete results at Black Hat USA in August. Until then, companies should at least be reviewing their processes to make sure that they're on the good side of access rights.
Now, have you ever bought equipment secondhand? I know I have. Sometimes you don't have to have the latest and greatest to take advantage of new technology. Well, in the case of Nest cameras, you might want to second guess the secondhand devices. As part of the Nest ecosystem and integration, it integrates with a third-party hub called Wink. Now, anytime you have a third-party integration, you have to assume that it's not really a tight integration here. Well, in this case, it was not. In the case of a Nest camera owner decided they wanted to sell the device, they would unregister their actual device from the account, which removes it from the Nest app and the streams. Now, however, this didn't affect the Wink integration at all. Even if the Nest camera was no longer in the owner's possession and it was sold to someone else, the Wink app still had a link to the feed. Now, it actually allowed previous owners to view still images from the camera at any time without detection from the new owner. Now, the new owner would actually go and sign up the new Nest account and add the camera that they just bought and think all things were going great. Now, although Google claims that the issue has now been fixed and resolved, the process of buying a pre-owned Nest camera can still be quite complicated. Now, if a previous owner hasn't registered the camera from their account, then the only advice Google's support page has is to email the previous owner directly to ask them to remove the device. Still, at least you'd be aware that there's actually a problem in that case, unlike the most recent oversights that they actually had a problem. Now, this had Google second guess their third-party integrations as they deal with privacy, and they actually discontinued the integration in favor of only integrating with Google's Assistant program.
Cable companies can save money now that the DOCSIS 3.0 upgrade is mostly done. Cable companies like Charter and Comcast are mostly done rolling out DOCSIS 3.1 standard on their networks, which will see their operating expenses drop significantly to the tune of billions of dollars per year. Meanwhile, manufacturers such as Aris, who sell DOCSIS equipment to the cable companies, are seeing their sales revenues dip. These two events should have predictable effects on stock prices for both the cable companies and their equipment suppliers, but I'm not your financial advisor. FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai claimed repeatedly that his deregulatory policies have spurred cable companies to spend more on infrastructure to increase access to broadband. The reality is that the spike investment by cable companies has been mostly due to needed upgrades to existing infrastructure already occurring before Pai took office, which did nothing to increase reach or access for broadband to millions of Americans. Remember the data I mentioned and Pai cited in my first blip? That was when Pai didn't mention the declines in cable network spending. He pointed to data from U.S. Telecom, which is fairly flawed, which says that combined network spending on wireline and internet and mobile broadband increased from $72 billion in 2017 to $75 billion in 2018. U.S. Telecom attributed the increase to companies rolling out fiber and 5G wireless, saying that Pai's repeal of net neutrality rules in 2017 likely spurred that rise. Pai has also previously claimed that ISPs responded, quote unquote, to FCC reforms by deploying fiber to 5.9 million new homes in 2018, the largest number ever recorded. But about half those new fiber lines came from a multi-year deployment that AT&T began during the Obama administration. It was the Obama-era FCC that in 2015 required AT&T to deploy fiber to 12.5 million customer locations within 4 years as part of its approval of the AT&T DirecTV merger. In other words, Pai and U.S. Telecom are now both claiming that Pai's deregulatory policies caused fiber deployment that was required by the FCC before Pai was the chair. Similarly, the mobile industry's ongoing upgrade from 4G to 5G was planned years in advance and wasn't caused by Pai's policies. Despite plenty of evidence that the FCC policy decisions have little to no impact on broadband network spending and the recent discovery that his broadband deployment data exaggerated growth, Pai this week continued to vow that he will strip away regulations that broadband providers don't want to follow. And since money talks, it bears mentioning that publicly traded ISPs, which are legally required to provide accurate risk factor information to investors, have admitted that net neutrality rules didn't affect their broadband investments.
Well, speaking of money, it just gets more expensive to be a victim. This year, the cost per cyber attack has hit $4.6 million. The cost of these cyber attacks spiked more than $1.5 million in just the last year, going from $3 million per incident in 2018 to $4.6 million in 2019. Pricier breaches are becoming more frequent. The percentage costing $10 million or more nearly doubled from 7% in 2018 to 13% this year. Now, the researchers from Radware who put together the report found that there are 4 main business impacts after a cyber attack: customer loss, brand reputation lost, revenue loss, and operational effects. Cybersecurity has also become an executive issue, with 72% of executives reporting that it's on every board meeting agenda. What are the reasons executives are now taking cybersecurity seriously? Well, one of them is certainly that companies report their customers, including consumers, want to know just what it is that companies are doing to protect their personal information. And these executives are finding that not having an answer is beginning to cost more than paying for better security.
Now, you may wonder how often large organizations are actually hit with service disruptions or even attacks. Well, when it comes to retailers, sometimes it's hard to hide it from consumers. Now, this past week, Target's registers and the network went down for an extended period, preventing customers from getting their Target fix for the weekend. Now, how could this actually cost Target? Well, just 2 hours of business on a busy day like Saturday could actually cost Target $50 million. Now, Target generates anywhere from 1/5 to 1/3 of its profits from its weekly sales on Saturday. However, that wasn't all that Target had to deal with this week. In an unrelated set of issues, the following day, Target was hit with another problem with their data centers run by technology vendor NCR Corp. Now, this time it wasn't the registers that were affected, but the select number of credit card payments that they actually couldn't process. Now, since this was an issue on the eves of Father's Day, long lines ensued, and Target actually was again hit with a broad set of people walking out and not wanting to wait in line. Now, customer traffic is one of the major primary metrics used in retailers, especially Target. And this was struck this past week. And it just goes to show you that maintaining visibility into your network and services at all times could have a direct effect on your bottom line. Well, folks, that does it for the blips. Next up, the bites. But before we do, we have to thank a great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's LastPass. Now, people have their favorite tools. It saves them time. It saves them money. Mine is definitely LastPass. I love LastPass. In fact, I use LastPass so often, I don't even know I'm actually using it anymore. It's one of my favorite tools. Now, think about it. You have a username and password for every site you go to, every site, especially the ones you find most important, like your financial sites, your business sites, your social networks, email, so on and so forth. You name it. For me, it's actually 5 banks. I'm supposed to have a different username and password for every one of those sites. It literally becomes impossible to remember and manage, and you don't want to write passwords down because that will make it so that people can find them and you'll lose them. And you don't want to actually store them in plain text on your devices or in your email because that's just a bad idea. Now, that's where LastPass comes in and saves us all. It literally automatically remembers and fills in your passwords anytime, anywhere, whether you're on a computer or on a mobile device. All you have to do is remember that master password, and LastPass remembers the rest. Now, I got hooked on it when I was starting to use it on my desktop, but it became so useful, I started using it on all my devices, every one of them. In fact, I have browser add-ins to make it easier for me to web log into those fancy sites. It supports Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Opera, and more. And plus, it works great on your mobile devices like Android and iOS. Now, what adds peace of mind is actually that your data is actually encrypted and decrypted at the device level. That means that data is really just stored in the vault, and it's kept secret even from LastPass. Now, I remember the day I was called at work. My family needed a password to get into a bank account to actually make a payment. Did I remember it? Of course I didn't. All I had to do was visit that LastPass vault. I used my master password, and bam, I could give them that password, and they were able to log in and pay the bill. LastPass literally saved me time and time is definitely money. Now, I'm talking about my personal experience and my personal use account, but they also have LastPass families for the entire family, and LastPass works great and amazing for enterprises too. Now, LastPass recently announced their new LastPass business lineup. Now, there are 3 innovative products bringing the control IT really needs and the convenience users really expect. Now, LastPass Enterprise includes single sign-on technology with 1,200 plus pre-integrated apps. It also supports MFA. It goes beyond the standard 2-factor authentication. And it also ensures for users to actually access the data at the right time without any added complexity. Now, LastPass Identity is actually a combination of LastPass Enterprise and LastPass MFA. And it provides really a holistic view of end user activity from a single dashboard that covers passwords, authentication, and all apps in use. Enterprises are always battling people trying to breach their network. In fact, check out this piece of data. 81% of breaches are caused by weak or reused passwords. Plus, a survey shows that 32% of employees today actually share passwords. That's a lot. That's actually a lot. LastPass makes it easy for you to actually randomly generate passwords, and as well as make sure that you have a secure vault for managing and accessing those passwords. That's super important. Now, organization can set master passwords. They can set restrict access in specific devices and locations. They can reset passwords and more. I worked up with a team of numerous. A team actually had numerous test accounts and service accounts, and they all had to do is log in using their Active Directory, and they were able to federate this access to actually get their LastPass passwords, so they can actually have one password to rule them all. Now it's actually integrated with Active Directory. That's huge for IT admins. For me, it's really just a single password, my AD password, and boom, I'm ready to go. Honestly, I love this tool. I need this tool. I'm a LastPass user for life. I love it. Protect yourself and your business with LastPass, the #1 most preferred password manager, trusted by over 43,000 businesses. LastPass is bringing the gap between access and authentication to simply and securely manage identity. Join over 13.5 million people who have signed up for LastPass and are loving and trusting it. Visit lastpass.com/twit to find out how they can help you. LastPass.com/twit to learn more. And we thank LastPass for their support in This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's now time for the bites. And of course, this time we're talking a little bit about cyber warfare. Of course, we have to talk about that. Now, we tend to hear that about cyber warfare after the fact, and this time it seems to have actually happened in the open. Now, this past week, the Kremlin actually openly warned that the reports of the U.S. attempting to breach Russia's electric power grid could trigger a cyber war between the two countries. Now, what triggered this public-facing warning, you might ask? Well, just a couple days before, the New York Times actually reported that the Pentagon's U.S. Cyber Command, which actually runs the military's offense and defense operations in the online world, was aggressively stepping up its targeting of Russia's grid. Now, if that wasn't enough, there are actually details about how the command had also taken steps into placing crippling malware inside the Russian system at a depth and with more aggression that has seen before. Now, this report was left not without speculation and question, especially by analysts. In fact, some analysts have cast doubt on the New York Times reporting that the United States was putting implants inside Russia's grid, and the publication was clear it had no classified information or deep information about how deep Russia's power infrastructure and how the U.S. was going into it. Now, the report, however, was enough to get the attention of the Kremlin officials, who pushed back, and it posted Monday by the TASS news industry, which was actually owned by the Russian government. In fact, the New York Times said that the United States' increasingly offensive digital incursions into Russia's electrical infrastructure were part of the broader view designed to make Russia and other U.S. adversaries pay the price for engaging in cyber operations against the U.S. or in U.S. interests. Now, such operations include inroads into the U.S. industrial systems by the same Russian hackers who breached the regional power authorities in Ukraine back in 2015. Now, these breaches left hundreds of thousands of people in the region of the country without electricity. While it remains unclear precisely how the new, more aggressive digital incursion into Russia's power grid are manifesting themselves, Saturday's report has clearly gotten the attention of Russian foreign policy commentators. All right, guys, I want to bring you guys in. I feel like This is almost like the making of a Jack Ryan movie script or something. But Curtis, I want to go to you first. I always thought that especially the Cold War now that we're in cyber warfare, that it's supposed to be kind of fought in the clandestine world, not in the public or public postings of news articles. What's going on here? Is this just a superficial thing and we shouldn't worry about it?
Well, whenever we have word of something like this get out, I start looking at why it might be useful to have that word out. And in this case, it's entirely possible that someone in one of our three-letter agencies wants the Russians to be thinking carefully about what they're likely to do about the elections that are coming up next year. We know that there are hackers, many of them from Russia, who have penetrated U.S. critical infrastructure. We know that they are likely to want to have an impact on our elections next year. And we know that many states and even the federal government has been reluctant to allocate any defensive money to protecting the elections, or for that matter, do an adequate job of protecting the critical infrastructure. So how do you protect it? Well, one of the ways is that you make it seem to a potential attacker like it could be very expensive to attack our systems. And so that's entirely possible. I'm not surprised by any of this. As you say, it's a little surprising that it's become as public as it has, but let's look at reasons why it would serve someone to have this public. And I think we can come up with explanations for this kind of information release.
Makes sense. I think one thing that's interesting is there actually could be, if they did actually attack, could be collateral damage here. So that does kind of send a quick message. Brian, what about you? What do you say? What do you think? Is it sending a message about the private sector or even utilities that, hey, you need to step up your cybersecurity efforts, otherwise you're going to be open to these types of things?
Well, I think if this latest news is what gets you to step up your efforts, then you haven't been paying attention very much. This is stuff we've known, right? We know that nation states are working against our interests all the time. We know that, in particular, power grids, infrastructure, networks are particularly vulnerable because they run with embedded systems that are notoriously hard to secure because they're not running on general purpose operating systems like Windows or Linux. They're not running on even like full-blown servers with plenty of memory to install such things with lots of extra processor power. Embedded systems have a lot of limitations in terms of what kind of things you can put in place. There's a little bit of a cottage industry that's popped up to try and provide better ICS and SCADA security, industrial control systems. But it really, this is not news, right? If you're just ramping up your efforts because you heard this, then you haven't been paying attention, and we should really just be assuming that we're in a default state of breach.
Makes sense. Now, Curtis, I want to throw this back to you because last week we did talk about this. Now, in this case, the New York Times is a long-standing news source, right? But it sounds like they had some missing information, like almost a bit of sensibility here when it comes to the information they were trying to purvey. And I think that almost the Russian response was an appropriate response to say, hey, if you do it, it'll be a big problem. But I think in this case, maybe it wasn't. So I maybe throw it to you. What do you think of this story? Is it really should have been out there at all?
Well, I think it's the kind of story that we should know about. And, let me add that in a case like this, when you've got a story about some sort of national defense interest, it is standard journalistic practice to go to the agencies, to the military, if that's the case, and say, I've got a story. Here's what it's covering. Is there a legitimate security reason for me not to do this story? In other words, would ongoing operations be jeopardized? Would human beings be jeopardized? Typically in the case of the military with some sort of operation that's underway. And many, many, many times, the journalistic organization will work with the agencies involved to make sure that there is no damage done. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the story will be killed, but it means that there are sensitivities here. And I have heard from people who know these things that, in fact, that's what the Times did. They went to the various agencies, said, this is the story. Is there any reason why we should not run this? And all of the agencies said, no, there's no national security interest that would keep you from running this. And so I trust the process there. And I think it's good for citizens of a nation to know as much as possible about what the agencies of that nation are doing on their behalf. And that includes knowing as much as practically possible about defense, because knowing that such things are happening, and especially with relatively few details like what we have here, it makes it easier for people not to panic about what might be going on. They know that something is happening on their behalf, and that can be reassuring in today's world. Although that reassurance depends heavily on just how much faith you have in the good judgment of everyone involved.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, that does it for that bite. Let's go ahead and jump into your bite, Curtis. A little bit more about ransomware going on here.
Yeah, we had an interesting case. Now, let's all admit that practically no one in the insurance industry, in the security industry, in the law enforcement world recommends paying the ransom for ransomware. There are just a whole ton of reasons why it's a bad idea. But none of those reasons stopped the leaders of Riviera Beach, Florida, which is a small little town of 35,000 people or so, just on the north side of West Palm Beach, from authorizing a payment of 65 Bitcoins, which on the day they did it was worth somewhere around $600,000 to criminals in the hope that a ransomware attack against the city would be backed off and they would get the unencryption keys so that they could regain access to their data. Now, this attack began on May 29th when a police department employee opened a malicious email attachment and the havoc began to spread. It ended up taking off systems that included the city's email, a water utility pumping station, some of the city's phones, the ability to accept utility payments online, the ability to accept any payments by credit card. Now, the city has tried to do a number of things. They authorized moving expenditure of about $900,000 up from next year where it was planned to this year so that they could replace the damaged and infected hardware. They have gone through and had their own forensic experts, outside experts, working on this. And so the question is, why did they do it? And we don't know very much about that because there's not a whole lot of record about the conversation that went on in the meeting where that payment was authorized. There's no question that this has been an expensive year for municipalities having to deal with ransomware. In the past 12 to 18 months, we've seen a number of different cities, including Baltimore and Atlanta, have to deal with this. And in both of those cases, the cost ended up being millions and millions of dollars, even though neither of them, to our knowledge, actually paid a ransom. One of the things that people warn about when it comes to this ransomware payment is that it can encourage criminals to see ransomware as an effective revenue generating strategy. Over the past 24 months or so, we've actually seen the number of ransomware cases going down because so many companies have just a flat policy of not paying the ransom regardless. What that's done, though, is renew the criminals' attention on organizations that have fewer luxuries when it comes to their principles. Municipal governments, healthcare organizations and companies where there really are some major, perhaps literal life and death consequences of not getting their data back. So I want to bring my co-hosts in. And Bam, I'm going to turn to you first. When should expediency overrule principle? Are there any sort of hard and fast rules that you can think of that say, okay, when this line has been crossed, it's okay to pay whatever the attackers want just to get the data back?
Wow, that's a really tough question, Curt. Really, it's when it comes down to life and death things. I mean, we've seen it where whole hospital networks have been on the line, where truly life support systems could be taken offline if ransoms weren't paid. These are issues where you certainly are looking at true life and death scenarios. However, there's other areas that are a lot grayer, right? I mean, take a municipality like you described, or even a small business who might go under if they don't pay the ransom. And I was actually in this position in a past life where we were DDoS ransomed, right? Not ransomware the way it's rolled out today via malware and data encryption or corruption, but DDoS botnets pointed at revenue generating platforms with attackers, demanding a certain amount of money wired into an offshore account, unless and if we didn't pay it, they would take us down. And not coincidentally, those ransoms were right in line with the emergency services from, say, a service provider or a DDoS scrubber. So these attackers tend to know what the tolerance or threshold, or what the risk benefit analysis goes for anyone who's operating on a system that they're attending to attack. So I don't know if there's a hard and fast rule, because if I'm a small business owner, I'm getting off the ground and I haven't done the right thing to secure my data, and the attacker's done their homework and they know what I have in the bank, they're gonna ask for the requisite sum of money that is, while painful, less than what I would lose in terms of losing my whole business or something of that nature. So it's very difficult to provide a really like a rule of thumb that everyone can follow. It's going to vary very much on a case by case basis, and we should probably make backing up data a lot easier than we already have, and that's probably my best advice for anybody is figure out a backup policy.
Well, Brian, I'm going to stay with you because you do have some experience with this sort of thing, and as we say, in the real world. How can it be that even a small city like Riviera Beach doesn't have adequate backups? For that matter, how can it be that a city like Atlanta, a city like Baltimore, doesn't have backups that would make this much less of a problem? Is it the case that backups, even under the best of circumstances, aren't going to protect us? Or is the lesson here that we really do need to have good backup mechanisms in place, no matter what size our organization is?
So my experience has taught me that backups are often either one, not as reliable as we'd like them to be, right? We go, if you're an IT organization of any size, you run a fire drill, so to speak, and test your backup and restore, and you often find that you can never restore fully. Two, backups often take a long time in terms of restoration of data. So those two factors, in my personal experience, often may contribute to a willingness to pay a ransom, right? Less than 100% trust in your backups. When you're in this position of being ransomed, you say, well, you go to your IT staff and you say, all right, listen, do we feel like we are adequately backed up that we shouldn't pay this ransom? And they might get back an answer that they don't like, that, the last time we ran a dry run of a backup and restore, disaster recovery drill, it didn't go well. Or the other answer is, last time we ran this, it took us, 2 days to get fully restored. That's, maybe 2 days of revenue, 2 days of critical systems offline, whatever the case may be. So backups are a great strategy, but only when they're actually usable in a crisis scenario.
Well, I wish I could say that this will be the last time we have a chance to talk about something like this, but I have the strange feeling that we're going to have the opportunity to revisit these issues again. I would love to get Lou's take on this, but I know that Lou would love to get our guest take on a whole different set of issues. So I'm going to close this up, thank Brian for all of his wisdom, and say, Lou, turn it over to you.
Thanks, Curtis. Yeah, absolutely. We're going to want to get our favorite part of the show, which is bringing in the guest to drop in some knowledge to the Twilight Riot. But before we do, I want to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is Atlassian. Now, whether you're actually an engineer, an IT team, or just somebody who wants to manage a large team and all of their work items, you probably have used an Atlassian product or two. Now, I remember way back in 2002, when Agile was just getting started to become that big thing, and Atlassian launched their product that would meet the needs of IT organizations trying to be Agile. Now, originally it was conceived as a bug tracking tool, but the Jira ticket quickly became the digital record of choice for tracking units of work. Now, fast forward 16 years, DevOps is on everyone's docket, of course, and Atlassian is still leading the pack in areas that helps teams rise to that occasion. Now, Atlassian really is a collaboration software company that empowers IT teams around the world. Now, like all organizations, you want to ship products faster, more efficiently, and with high quality. Plus, you want to ensure your customers' feedback adds to that business value prop. Well, sometimes businesses fall short because of all their disjointed workflows. Well, that's where Atlassian jumps in and helps. They give you and your organization the power to manage complex collaborations. Now, Atlassian provides the technology backbone to help modern IT organizations plan, service, and support the kind of change that propels your business forward. Now, Atlassian offers an affordable, reliable suite of tools for teams of all sizes, from DevOps to Agile, IT apps to Ops to ITSM, and to whatever comes next. They really can help you out now. Now, for me, I've been using Bitbucket for many years to manage all my software projects and source code and documentation. Anything anytime there's an issue with any of those projects, there's tickets that come in from Jira, and I'm actually alerted on my Microsoft Teams channel. Now, sometimes I'm even told if there's any duplicate issues or if I need to promote one issue over another. Some super cool features actually come out there. Now, with Jira software, Confluence, and Bitbucket, Atlassian forms the backbone of effective cross-team project planning, organization, and communication. Now, with Jira Ops, OpsGenie, and Status Page, they actually help teams to better detect incidents and alert response teams to coordinate response efforts to solve real-world issues faster and keep customers or stakeholders up to date. Now, your team can choose the tools that are right for your current framework while trusting as you grow, Atlassian's tools will grow with you. Now, like all Atlassian products, the tools for your IT team are easy and free to try. Just head to Atlassian.com/teams/IT to find out which Atlassian offering is right for your team. Try Atlassian today to see what IT can be. That's Atlassian.com/teams/IT. And we thank Atlassian for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's my favorite part of the show. We get to bring in a guest to drop some knowledge on the TWIRI. And today we have Bill Malik, VP of Infrastructure Strategies at Trend Micro. Bill, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here.
Now, Bill, our audience loves hearing origin stories and like people's journey through the tech industry. Can you maybe take us on a short journey through your career and what brought you to Trend Micro?
Okay, well, been in IT for 45 years. Started writing code for an insurance company. Yes, I know Y2K. I actually did that. Went to IBM, worked on the mainframe operating system in Poughkeepsie. I was with IBM a total of 12 years. I was 90. Helped found the information security service there. So that was when information security really ramped up professionally. Left Gartner in 2001. I worked as an IT auditor for a while. I became CTO of a startup that Sun acquired, Waveset. It was identity management. After working for Sun for a bit, I went out on my own. And about 3 years ago, I saw a report on LinkedIn of Trend Micro's financials. And enormous amount of cash on hand, no debt, tremendous revenue, interesting global presence. So I called the president, a gentleman I'd known from my Gartner days, and said, if you guys aren't about to acquire somebody, you should be. And so he said, come down and talk to us. And I went down and joined a few months later. I'm one of the evangelists. It's my job to write about issues that are relevant to Trend's prospect and customer base. And I've been doing that happily for over 2 years now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bill. Well, now we have a ton of things to talk about here, but before we do, I want to get into a little bit about what's going on here. Now, many organizations have been burned by the old Y2K bug back in the past, back in 2000. Software had a ton of updates to compensate for it, but not many people have heard of this whole concept of GPS week rollover. Now, can you maybe go through what it is, what's going on here?
Sure. Well, a satellite needs to know how long it's been up and uses that to calculate its location with some degree of precision. Now, these satellites carry a counter, and the counter ticks off the weeks since the beginning of time, which, if your computer, is January 1, 1980. The counter is 10 bits long. So let's stop and do some arithmetic. If it's a 10-bit counter, that means it go to 1023. There's 52 weeks in a year, which means after about 19 years, the counter rolls over, which actually happened in August of 1999. It wasn't a big deal at the time. Because there weren't a lot of systems that were tightly integrated with GPS location and time data. However, it happened again in April on the 6th. I was giving a talk on satellite security Maresca in March, and I made an off-the-cuff comment that because of this impending rollover, I wasn't going to be flying on Saturday, the 6th of April. Well, it turned out that was hyperbole. For the sake of emphasis. It was picked up by the press, and there were some rather extravagant claims about a catastrophic failure across the global GPS network. So after it passed, we did have two significant indications that there were problems. The first was some Boeing 787s associated with China airlines were grounded because their flight deck information systems said, we're at 280 degrees, we're flying at 0.84 Mach, where altitude is 29,000 feet, and today is the 22nd of August, 1999. A problem. If you're a pilot, you'd like to know all of the numbers are correct. And in fact, the manufacturer of this particular component was unable to verify the airworthiness of those. So about 15 of these leading edge aircraft were downed. The other significant impact that I've heard of is New York City has a public Wi-Fi system called NYC Win. It's what powers the kiosks you'll see on the street. It also provides the transport mechanism for the cameras that New York City's streetlights use to determine when they should go from red to green to yellow, etc. Well, that system went down. It went down at 7:59 p.m. on Friday the 5th, which was exactly when the rollover occurred, GMT. Took them 10 days to get it back up. Now, the nice thing about IoT is that, in industrial control systems generally, is that the engineers that build them are very, very conscientious about safety. So when an ICS or IoT device, with some exceptions, fails, it'll do so in a way that preserves the safety of the environment, doesn't put people at risk, isn't going to cause damage to physical surroundings. So when these signals stopped working, they didn't just go dark, they reverted to their pre-intelligent behavior, which is 90 seconds of red, 90 seconds of green, 15 seconds of yellow, etc. So it wasn't that the streets stopped in Manhattan. It was that they were no longer able to take advantage.
So you talked a little bit about the problem that had happened before, right? You said GPS rollover happened before. There was some critical systems that kind of were affected by this. Now, fast forward, if this happens again, are there other more critical systems today actually relying on GPS that this could actually affect?
Well, candidly, my biggest concern were highly automated ports. If you take a look at what goes on in Rotterdam or Port Elizabeth, New Jersey, when a big container ship comes in, there are 20,000 containers on the large ones, and each crane can load or unload one box per minute. The entire process is automated, and it's governed by GPS. So if the cranes had been getting bad GPS signals, they could have been, dropping a container into the Hudson. That did not happen. Now, it's not going to get worse because there's the good news. In 2010, the newer satellites use a 13-bit counter. So the rollover is now 157 years away. For those satellites that are still on a 10-bit counter, they've been updated. The next problem will be in the year 2038. And we do have satellites that are up there for a long time. So some of those will still be lingering around. I'm eager to see if anything significant happens.
Right, makes sense. Now, this type of thing, I mean, now that, like you said, some manufacturers, they know about it, they fixed it. You have some that are still floating around that have the problem. Is there, in this case, then, is that kind of minimizing the effect that this does happen again? Is there, could it cost less money because it's happening, or is there time for them to go and upgrade and fix the problem right now?
Well, the only way to upgrade is to replace the satellite or to get up there ahead of time and reset the counter in anticipation of the rollover. Those are not trivial efforts. The FAA did issue a bulletin about a year ago saying this was going to happen, and aircraft manufacturers and suppliers should be aware of it. Apparently, the memo didn't get everywhere it needed to go.
Right. Now, I did actually see that the Department of Homeland Security actually issued a warning here as well. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes.
So what are they saying? Like what are they saying that people should, or manufacturers should be doing?
The warning just simply said, so take precautions, be ready to deal with the consequence. The interesting thing here is they're talking to satellite providers. The impact was felt by a city that is trying to become a smart city. And so what we're looking at is a failure that propagated along a supply chain, a bad design decision that was made in the early 1990s, brought down the Wi-Fi in a major city 25 years later. That's a problem.
Right. Makes sense. I actually want to dig into that a little bit more about those effects. But before we do, we want to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Worldwide Technology. Now, WWT began building their advanced technology center, their ATC, about 10 years ago, and it really has grown exponentially. Now, it's like no other testing and research facility and lab that I've actually seen. Now, the lab contains more than $500 million in equipment from hundreds of OEMs, ranging from heavyweights like Dell EMC, VMware, and Intel, to actually emerging disruptors like Tanium, Equinix, and Expanse. Now, WWT is a trusted partner, stays with you over the many years. Now, many of their customers have been with them for almost over a decade, because they know that WWT is where they can go to get the answers they need to make sure that their business runs right. Now, their ATC is actually an incubator for IT innovation, and it offers tons of things. Now, hundreds of on-demand integrated solution labs representing the newest advances in flash storage, hyperconverged infrastructure, hybrid clouds and analytics, infrastructure automation, data protection, and more. Now, learn more and more about the products before you launch, because WWT's engineers can use these environments to quickly spin up proofs of concepts and pilots and use them as sandboxes, so you and your organization can confidently select the best solution for you. Now, in many cases, this actually reduces the time it takes to actually get concepts to market from months to weeks. Now, they can offer lab as a service, which is actually dedicated lab space within ATC, where here customers can actually perform programmatic up testing using their vast ecosystem of technology that they've already built. Now, it's actually virtual, so you can take advantage of ATC's unique benefits anywhere around the world, 24/7. Now, their engineers work in these labs every day. They beta test new equipment, build referencing architectures and custom integrations to help their customers make decisions and see results faster with much less investment. Now, later this summer, WWT will be launching a new digital platform with hands-on access to more than 200 lab environments. To learn more about WWT, the ATC, and sign up for pre-launch access to their new on-demand lab platform, go to wwt.com/twit. WWT simplifies the complex. That's wwt.com/twit. WWT, delivering business and technology outcomes around the world. And we thank Worldwide Technology for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, let's get back to Bill. Now, Bill, you've been talking a little bit about the GPS rollover and how it's been affecting things, and we talked about how satellite manufacturers are going to have to handle this going forward. That there's a lot of new satellites have been updated, but a lot of still kind of exist. But this has an extenuating circumstance, an unintended consequence to other devices, and both consumer and enterprise alike, that are using GPS in their systems. Can you go more into detail about that, and maybe how it's potentially going to affect organizations and, like you said, even smart cities?
Well, the problem is that when you look at a system like a smart city, a very, very complex system of systems, and what we're just beginning to see is that a fault in a piece over here can ripple through undetected and cause a problem in a seemingly unrelated part over there. So the satellite GPS issue is a one-time thing. We haven't seen significant reports of other problems, although there may be such things that are kept within the confines of a particular enterprise. The larger concern is when we build these tall towers of technology, we're creating vulnerabilities. The reason that Trend Micro is looking at this is that when you peel off, all of the wonderfully exciting space stuff around satellites, what you're really looking at is an industrial control system device. It's got sensors, it's got actuators, it's got some sort of data processing capability aboard, it's making decisions real time. And there are design decisions in there that can cause significant impacts. In 2002, in the wake of a series of problems with satellites, the GAO published a report, and they had two charts that were noteworthy. The first was the unintentional threats to satellites, and there they were talking about things like solar wind or meteorites, or what would be called acts of God. And then they had a second category of things called intentional threats to satellites, and that's somebody tries to take over a tower, somebody jams a transmission, somebody intentionally knocks a satellite out of the sky. What they didn't have was a third category for bad design decisions or poor programming, code bugs, which are neither intentional or unintentional. And my concern is not just with the particular GPS, but with the larger problem of these neither intentional or unintentional threats that are a consequence of bad code. In 2009, there's a system that takes a look at satellites. There are 24,000 objects right now orbiting the Earth, 10 centimeters in size or larger. And we're putting up dozens every couple of weeks with these new microsatellites. Well, there's software programs called Socrates, which describes the position of all these things. And one of the concerns that was identified actually fairly early, a physicist named Kessler, said, we've got so many of these things up there, there is a risk that if one satellite hits another, it'll create debris that'll cause other satellites to fail. So in 2009, the system said, these two satellites, this defunct Soviet-era communications satellite over there and this system, satellite number 33 of the Iridium system, they're going to pass within 564 meters. Okay, 564 meters. That's a good piece. Well, what ended up happening was they collided. Now, the result of the collision was 2,000 pieces of debris now traveling in an orbit. They actually had to move the International Space Station higher to get it out of the way. And then you say, well, what made them think it was 564 meters if the correct answer was 0? And there are two possible explanations for that. The first is that the information they were getting was erroneous. The readings were incorrect, and so they performed a calculation based on bad data. The second one was that the readings they got were correct, but they were imprecise. And in the course of doing the calculation to say how far apart they would be, we knew where they were, we knew how fast they were moving. What we didn't know is that we only had 2 digits of precision. And so the user interface, the code that generated that message saying it'll be 564 meters, that invented precision. And this is, again, another thing, if you don't have an engineering background and you're asked to multiply 2 numbers as a programmer, you know how to do that. That kind of error can also propagate across systems and cause other systems to fail. So the larger issue is not, is the GPS problem going to happen again? Yes, less so in the future. Older satellites are dropping out of service. In fact, there's even a Japanese company now that sends up satellites to find failing satellites, clamp on them magnetically, and then drag them back into the atmosphere so they burn up. The problem is that these systems have assumptions that may not be properly correct or properly interpreted. I mean, where's the API specification that says you can have this many digits of precision in your time measurement from a GPS, in your position measurement from a GPS? One of the things that happened in '99 was when some of the satellites rolled over, they began confusing other satellites. And so there actually was a cascading failure among some GPS satellites in the fall of 1999. Wasn't heavily reported because not a lot of people were using GPS systems at that time. So they figured things went wrong. So that's the larger issue. And from a smart cities or smart ports or smart cars perspective, we want to make sure that the information that's coming in is as accurate as it is possible to be, right? I mean, the message maybe should have said, these 2 satellites are going to pass within half a kilometer, best we can do, heads up. That's not really how you want to have to run these things. But if that's the best data you've got, that's the best decision you can make. So we're looking at an increasing number of unforeseen consequences. That's the concern.
That's the 2020. Good. So I do want to bring my co-hosts in because they do have some questions for you. I want to throw it over to Curtis first. Curtis, you want to talk about a little bit about NAV?
Well, Bill, we've been talking quite understandably about the implications of these issues on the navigational aspects of GPS. But as you know, GPS is also used as a precision timing system for everything from routers to scientific instruments. The kind of issues that you're dealing with and their fixes, do these have any implications for all of the applications that are using GPS as a precision timing system.
Well, yes, precisely. In fact, it was the timing component, not the location component, that forced the planes to be grounded. The time was being reported, wildly and accurately. It was 19 years and 8 months out of sync. So yeah, there are problems there. Certainly routers, certainly anything, autonomous vehicles. I'm concerned about their vulnerability, plus the ease with which somebody could replicate that. There's beaconing. You can spoof a GPS signal. It is now possible to authenticate a GPS signal, but it takes processing power, and it takes memory, and it takes time. And many simpler devices just grab the signal and say, okay, here's where you are. We've already had reports of ships being informed by their GPS that they're 20 miles inland from their position off coast. We've seen in 2002 the French security services messed with the GPSs that were GPS satellites that were being used by British and American tanks in a NATO exercise in Greece. The tanks got lost. So yeah, there are vulnerabilities there. I'm, let's say, looking with concern at the rollout of 5G, because now I've got an even more complex stack of technology, layers of virtualization. At every interface, you have another slice of your threat horizon. And so when you stack up a lot of these things, the possibility that an error here or an intentional defect injection there will cause things to go sideways, I think increases.
I do want to throw to Bam really quick, because I think Bam, you had some questions that are actually a little bit different than the whole GPS revision and rollover.
Yeah, so Bill, you mentioned it just a moment ago, the incident last year where some ships were suddenly found themselves located at an airport inland when they should be rightly located in the water, where they saw themselves surrounded by ocean. And that, in fact, was GNSS spoofing and jamming actively done by Russian military in an effort to protect President Putin's location. So, can you comment on what actually happened there? Because that wasn't, jamming is pretty common in these scenarios, but this was an instance where the first time, at least that it was reported, where spoofed locations were involved.
Yeah, and the general name for this is beaconing, messing with beaconing. And it's happened there. It even happened to us at an event a couple of years ago. We were showing off a car that could be, remotely managed, and in the next hall, we were showing off some technology that could fraudulently modify GPS signals. So they turned on the technology, and the next thing they knew was the car was saying that it was somewhere where it was nowhere near being. It was physically in Tokyo, I believe, and the signal said, looks like we're in Singapore. Can somebody please figure out what happened? And a lot of people's smartphones also went sideways. So yeah, there is fragility in these systems. And God love the engineers, because they are trusting people and they want to keep things safe. I read just recently that one of the auto manufacturers allows you to update its software by plugging a USB stick into the car, and the software in the car will read the USB stick, and if it sees a file named manufacturerupdate.exe, it'll run that file, regardless of what the file, how big it is, whether the hash matches anything, whether it's signed or not. That kind of thing is, it's beautifully naive, but we can't run an Industry 4.0 smart city, 5G world built on a technology stack that has that kind of misunderstandings at its base.
So let me follow that up with a question. My background is really largely network and web application security, where we have a lot of latitude, right, to add security features in after the fact. We've discovered that the attackers are highly motivated and have an unlimited number of things they can try. But fortunately, the infrastructures allow for us to add things like encryption for the transport. Allow us to harden the software on the endpoints so that we can execute things in a more trusted fashion other than trusting a file name that we expect to see. Can you comment a little bit about how this is different for embedded systems in industrial control and so forth and GPS? Embedded systems are, they don't have a lot of resources, a lot of CPU, a lot of memory. Often the networks are very fixed in nature. Can you comment on the challenges that we have with adding security after we discover we made some bad assumptions?
Well, yeah, it's a huge problem, and you've hit it exactly right. The technology that's incorporated in ICS and IoT devices is bare bones minimum. You want to get the thing up and running and out the door, and if you spend extra time doing additional design, that's extra cost, and that's delay and availability into the market. And so you'll see this mutual incomprehension between what an engineer wants to do and what a programmer wants to do. I saw an article recently that suggested that we could secure our SCADA systems by simply having the sensors put their real-time data into blockchain. And this would be easy because a computer that can generate the blocks would only cost $200. And I thought, interesting solution. Setting aside the question as to whether blockchain is in any way relevant to this, let's say you've got a solar farm. Let's say it's 3 or 4 acres. You have, in a 3 or 4 acre solar farm generating 140 megawatts, you have 1 million panels. And each panel has a sensor and an inverter. And for every 16 panels, you've got a PLC aggregating that data, digitizing it, and shipping it forward. So if you want to put a $200 computer on each device to blockchainize its output, you've just increased the cost of that array by $400 million. And if you want to ruggedize it, because it's going to be outside, you're now probably looking at something like $2 billion, $1,000 PCs, not $200 Raspberry Pis. So, yeah, it works in theory, but in practice, no manufacturer of solar cells is going to add $200 or $400 cost to each panel in order to, support this security thing. Now, the good news is, at the low level, at the chip level, the vendors that are making the chips for these devices are, in fact, doing the right thing. I use ARM as an example because they have a really nice, colorful chart, but Intel and Qualcomm and others are doing this as well. They're putting a side processor in the processor chip. So you've got your real-time OS on this side running the app that the chip is to do, managing the pump, interpreting the sensor. And then on this other side, you've got a secure kernel where you can securely download updates, where you can generate digital signatures, where you can encrypt and decrypt messages, where you can handle multi-factor authentication without disrupting the real-time requirements of that. And these chips are not that much more expensive. So you're not talking about raising the price by orders of magnitude. You're talking about raising the price by a few pennies. And that becomes practical, right? When you're talking about the street lights in New York, there were 12,000 of those lights that were reverted to their original reset to factory spec because of the GPS problem. So when you look at IoT and ICS, whatever solution you've got in mind has to scale 5 or 6 orders of magnitude, or it's never going to find its way to the market. And that's a challenge. I mean, imagine you had everything working and you could afford it. Now you've got 2,125,000 PCs you've got to maintain. the ongoing operational costs, even if somebody could give them devices to you free, would overwhelm the benefits of that technology and that solar farm we just mentioned. So the trick is to take the good common sense of the engineers that are designing things to be safe and durable and rugged. You turn it on, you leave it in place for 15 years, with the legitimate desire of the information security people to say, well, we've got to do logging. We've got to figure out what to log. We've got to do logging. We've got to do message authentication. We've got to be have some level of confidence that there's is the file they want me to execute digitally signed. Nice if we could validate that, right? And so we'll get there. We'll get there, and it's going to be with regulation as well. There's a law that just was marked up, looking at baseline cybersecurity good standards for design. Don't have the reference for you, but I just saw a tweet about it in the last 48 hours. So we'll get there, but it's not going to be voluntary. It's going to be driven by regulation, I'm sure.
We're talking with Bill Malik, VP of Infrastructure Strategies at Trend Micro. Bill, thank you so much for being here. This was a great topic. We definitely want to have you back if you'd have us, because there's so much more to talk about. Our co-hosts had a ton of other questions, so we'd love to have you back. Anytime.
I've been in this business 45 years. I learn something new every week. It's a great place. Thanks, guys.
Now, unfortunately, we've run low on time, but before we close up, I wanted to give you a chance maybe to tell us where they can learn more about Trend Micro, more about this GPS topic. Where can they go? Where can they find information?
Well, if you're interested in Trend Micro, we're doing a lot in Internet of Things. Start with our website, trendmicro.com/IoT. You'll be surprised at the scope of stuff. We're doing stuff for power systems, doing stuff for automobile security, doing stuff for smart homes, doing stuff for factories, doing stuff for just detecting problems in non-IP based networks. A lot there. As for the GPS story, there's a reporter, and I wish I had his name in front of me. Tom's Guide did a wonderful piece. Go to Tom's Guide and look up GPS rollover. That'll give you as much data and as little, pearl clutching, panic sounding phrasing. An excellent source for that. Or contact me, William Malik TM at Twitter.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, folks, you've done it again. You've sat through another hour of the Best Thing Enterprise podcast in the universe, according to 9 out of 10 least significant bits. But I want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially my co-host in crime, with whom I could not do this show without. Now, starting with our very favorite security journalist, Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, where can the folks at home find you and all of your great work?
Well, as always, they can find my writing at darkreading.com. I've got a lot of good stuff going on. This last week, I got out of the tech side a little bit and talked about some of the biggest venture capital deals we've seen in security so far this year. Some fascinating stuff and interesting to see where people who are supposed to know these things decide to put vast sums of money. I'm going to be turning my attention back to tech in the coming week, starting to get ready for Black Hat. And I would love to hear from our readers if there's anything that they think is going to be at Black Hat, or for that matter at FCON, that they'd like to know more about. Drop me a direct message at Twitter at KG4GWA. And let me know. I would love to bring some coverage back that people are really interested in seeing.
Thanks, Curtis. Well, we also have to thank our other enterprise expert in the panel here, our co-host in crime, Mr. Brian McHenry. Brian, where can the folks find you and all of your work?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at BA McHenry. You can also head on over to devcentral.f5.com, where all of the F5's, really innovative and interesting characters who use our gear and find really crazy ways to use it are sharing information all the time. And I'll put in a little plug for the official GitHub handle, github.com/F5 networks. You can find fully supported code for automating and orchestrating everything F5. And soon we'll be adding some stuff to support Nginx, to be sure.
Fantastic. Well, folks, we also have to thank you as well. You are the person who drops in each and every week to watch and listen to the show to get your enterprise goodness. And we want to make it easy for you to watch and listen and catch up on your enterprise news. So go out right now to our show page, twit.tv/Twyet. There you'll find all of the amazing back episodes, the show hosts, show notes, co-host information, guest information, links to all the stories that we do during the show. Plus, more importantly, next to those videos, you'll get those helpful download and subscribe links as well. Support the show by getting your audio version, your video version, or your HD video version of your choice. Listen on any one of your devices. And of course, it's really the best way to stay on top of your enterprise and IT news. Now, after you subscribe, go ahead and share the show with your friends and family and coworkers, because we love doing this show. And if we have a bunch of subscribers, we can keep doing it. So after you go ahead and do that and share it with your friends and family. Now, of course, remember, we do this show live each and every week at 1:30 p.m. Pacific on Fridays at live.twit.tv. And of course, if you want to come home, see how the show is run behind the scenes, go ahead and jump in the live, as well as you can also talk with the live chat room as well. That's irc.twit.tv. We love the chat room. We get some great questions and discussions from the chat room characters each and every week, and we love having them there. So go ahead and jump in there and join them as well. Now, don't forget, you can always check out me and follow me at twitter.com/LouMM. You can see what I do during my normal daily work week at Microsoft. Of course, you can also go check out dev.office.com. There you can see where we see all the latest and greatest ways of customizing and making Office more productive than it already is for your organization. I also want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to Leo and Lisa, who they continue to support each and every week this show, and we want to thank them for allowing us to continue to do This Week in Enterprise Tech. We also want to thank everyone on all the engineers at Twit. Thank you for your support. Also, thank you to our Mr. Brian Cheebert. He is our loyal producer. He does all the bookings, the plannings for the show. We couldn't really do this show without him, and thank you for all his hard work, especially since he has a day job as well. Before we sign out, I also want to thank our TD for today. Victor, you know the tradition, sir. What was the topic of today's show?
Oh, man. I was pretty calm this morning before I started the show, but now what I learned today, there's a lot more to worry about than I thought. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I would say you were super close. I would say the major topic was the GPS epic, but maybe next time. Maybe you'll get it next time.
Well, that was part of it. Yeah.
Fantastic. And until next time, I'm Louis Maresca, just reminding you, if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep quiet.